I never expected to have my own private lake. It was something I inherited, passed down from my grandfather, a man who spent his life protecting the land and making sure no one messed with it. The lake had always been a quiet sanctuary for me, a place where I could unwind after long workdays, fishing, kayaking, or simply enjoying the stillness of the water. But all of that changed when Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, decided my lake wasn't mine anymore. At first, it was small things. Strangers would appear on my property, setting up lawn chairs along the shoreline, acting as if they belonged there. A couple of kids started swimming in the water, and when I confronted them, they simply pointed to a laminated HOA sign that had been mysteriously posted near the lake. Community lake open to all residents. I ripped it down immediately, feeling my blood boil. That sign hadn't been there yesterday. That's when Karen herself showed up. She strutted toward me like she was running a board meeting, holding a clipboard and wearing her signature smug grin. "Oh good, I was hoping to catch you," she said, as if we were casual acquaintances instead of two people who had never exchanged a word before. "I assume you've heard the good news." I narrowed my eyes. "What news?" She let out a fake laugh. "The HOA board has officially designated this lake as a community amenity. It's now available for all residents to enjoy. Isn't that wonderful?" I took a step forward, trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. "No, it isn't, because this is private property. My property. That lake has been in my family for generations." Karen clicked her tongue, flipping through her clipboard. "I understand you may feel a sentimental attachment to the lake, but our bylaws clearly state that if a natural resource benefits the neighborhood, it can be reclassified under community use." I almost laughed. "That's not how property laws work." She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, you don't need to worry about all the technical stuff. The decision has already been made, and since you're not part of the HOA, you actually have no say in this. But don't worry, we'll take care of all the maintenance and management." I clenched my fists. "You mean you'll take control of my property?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "Now, let's not be dramatic. Think of it this way. This will increase property values for everyone." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't care about property values." "You don't have the authority to do this." Karen's expression darkened slightly, but she still kept that condescending tone. "Eric, I suggest you read your deed carefully. You might find that you don't have as much control over this land as you think." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, as more strangers arrived, dragging coolers, folding chairs, and setting up like they were at a public park. It was war. But what Karen didn't know, what she had failed to check before pulling this stunt, was that I wasn't just some clueless homeowner. I knew land and water rights better than anyone, because I worked for the State Department of Environmental Resources. And if Karen thought she could steal my lake, she was about to learn the hard way just how wrong she was. If Karen thought I was going to just roll over and let her steal my lake, she was sorely mistaken. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. I had owned this land outright since inheriting it from my grandfather. There was no way the HOA had any claim over it. I requested my property deed, old survey maps, and any zoning records related to my land. As expected, nothing supported Karen's claim. The lake and the surrounding property were fully private, legally owned by me. The HOA had zero authority over it. But then, I found something interesting. Karen had filed a request with the county just a month ago, trying to reclassify the lake as public access land under the guise of environmental conservation. That's when everything clicked. Karen wasn't just trying to make the lake public. She wanted full control over it. If she managed to get the county to approve this request, the HOA could charge maintenance fees to all the homeowners in the neighborhood, justifying higher dues and special assessments. I smirked. "Nice try, Karen, but you just made your biggest mistake." That afternoon, I returned home and found even more people at my lake. A group of teenagers were blasting music. A couple was setting up a tiki torch dinner, and worst of all, someone had tied a fishing boat to my private dock. That was it. I wasn't playing nice anymore. I marched right up to the boat and untied it, sending it drifting back into the lake. "Hey," a guy in sunglasses yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" I crossed my arms. "This is private property. Get off my land." Before he could respond, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eric." "What are you doing?" I turned to see Karen storming toward me, her HOA clipboard in hand. "I'm kicking trespassers off my land," I said flatly. She huffed. "That boat belongs to an HOA member. They have every right to dock here." I smirked. "No, they don't, because this isn't HOA land." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You really need to stop fighting this. It's already been decided. The lake is public now." I stepped closer. "That's funny because I just came back from the county records office. My land is still private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." For the first time, Karen's confident smirk wavered. "Well, the county is reviewing the reclassification. It's only a matter of time before they approve it." I chuckled. "No, they won't, because you made one fatal mistake." I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. "You tried to reclassify a lake without the approval of the State Department of Environmental Resources." Karen blinked. "What does that have to do with?" I cut her off. "I work for that department." Her face turned ghost white. I continued. "Your request was flagged this morning. The county can't approve it without a full ecological survey and an independent environmental impact study. That process takes years, and I just made sure your request is at the bottom of the pile." Karen stammered, but I wasn't finished. "Oh, and by the way, submitting fraudulent zoning claims without the landowner's permission." I smirked. "That's a crime." Her jaw dropped. You wouldn't dare." I shrugged. "I already filed a complaint with the county. You'll be hearing from them soon." Karen was shaking with rage. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to the people still lounging by my lake. "You all need to leave," I called out. "This is private property, and if you're trespassing here after today, I will call the police." Murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd. A few people glared at Karen, realizing they had been lied to. Slowly, one by one, they started packing up their things. Karen watched, fuming, as her power over the neighborhood crumbled before her eyes. But I knew she wouldn't give up that easily. She had just lost the first battle, but the war was far from over. Karen had lost the first battle, but I knew better than to assume she'd give up. She was too stubborn, too obsessed with control, and I was right. The very next morning, I woke up to something that nearly made my blood boil. Standing in my kitchen, coffee in hand, I glanced outside, only to find a freshly installed sign right at the lake's edge. Public Lake HOA members welcome. Karen was doubling down. And not just that, there were ropes sectioning off parts of the lake, as if the HOA had already claimed the area for itself. I stormed outside, marching straight toward the sign. The second I got close, I saw something that made me laugh out loud. Karen had used HOA funds to print professional metal signs. This wasn't some desperate attempt. She really thought she could get away with this, but before I could tear it down, I heard a voice. "You touch that sign and I'll have you fined for vandalism." I turned and there she was, Karen, standing smugly at the dock, arms crossed, flanked by two HOA board members. I exhaled slowly. "Karen, what the hell is this?" Her smirk widened. "It's official now. The HOA held an emergency vote last night. The lake is officially a neighborhood amenity." I took a deep breath. She really thought she could bully me into submission. "Karen," I said evenly, "this isn't how the law works," she scoffed. "It's already done. The signs are up and the members have been informed. You can fight it, but you'll be wasting your time." I smirked. "Oh, Karen, I really don't think I will," she frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my emails. "Because while you were busy putting up illegal signs, I was having a very interesting conversation with my legal team." I turned the screen toward her. It was a cease and desist order. Karen's face paled instantly. "This," I said, tapping the screen, "is from the State Environmental Protection Agency. They're officially investigating the HOA for illegally attempting to seize protected land." Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to argue, but I wasn't finished. "Oh, and you'll love this part," I added. "Because the HOA spent community funds on these fake signs and lake improvements, the board is now under investigation for misuse of HOA funds." Her face turned red. This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." "Oh, really?" I gestured to the signs. "You spent HOA money claiming land you don't own. That's fraud." The two board members behind her started shifting uncomfortably. I grinned. "Oh, don't worry. I sent copies of these reports to every homeowner in the neighborhood. I'm sure they'll love to hear how their fees are funding your personal power trip." The board members turned on Karen instantly. "Wait, we could get sued for this," one of them asked. Karen spun around. "It's fine. He's just bluffing. But she could already tell the tide was turning against her. Within an hour, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Dozens of homeowners gathered near the lake, reading the cease and desist letter I had printed and posted by the entrance. Karen was arguing with board members, but I could see it, the panic in her eyes. People were furious. "You mean to tell me our fees went to this nonsense?" one woman shouted. "I thought this was supposed to be about keeping the neighborhood safe, not stealing land. I want a refund." Karen tried to calm them down, but the damage was done. She had spent years ruling the HOA like a tyrant, and now people were finally pushing back. That's when Gerald, one of the oldest homeowners in the neighborhood, stepped forward. "I move for a vote," he said loudly. A vote of no confidence against Karen Foster as HOA president. Karen froze. "You can't do that," she shouted. "Yes, we can," Gerald said, crossing his arms. "HOA bylaws allow for a recall vote if enough homeowners agree, and judging by the crowd, I think we have plenty of support." The crowd erupted into cheers. Karen's face went white. I smiled. "Karen, I suggest you get ready, because after tonight, you won't be HOA president anymore." She glared at me, jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth, but she had lost. The vote was happening. And soon, Karen would be out. Karen had finally pushed too far. The neighborhood had turned against her, and the HOA board had been forced into a recall vote. That night, dozens of homeowners crammed into the community center, tension thick in the air. Karen sat at the front, still trying to act confident, but I could see the nervous way she clutched her clipboard. She knew she was losing control. Gerald, the oldest homeowner in the community, cleared his throat and stood up. "This meeting has been called," he said, his voice steady, "to address gross misconduct by the HOA president, specifically the illegal attempt to seize private property and misuse of HOA funds." Karen immediately jumped in. "Oh, please. This is just a smear campaign orchestrated by someone who doesn't respect community rules." I laughed. "You mean me?" The crowd chuckled. I stood up, holding up the cease and desist letter from the State Environmental Protection Agency. "Karen, this isn't a smear campaign. This is an official investigation. You illegally declared my lake as public property, spent HOA money on fake signs, and violated state land laws." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members shook his head. "Karen, you told us the HOA had the right to claim the lake." Karen's face twisted. "It was for the good of the neighborhood," another homeowner shot up. "You spent our money without a vote. I just checked my dues and they went up last month. Was that to fund your stupid signs?" More homeowners nodded angrily. Karen was losing control. Then Gerald spoke up again. "I call for an official vote of no confidence. If the majority agrees, Karen is removed as HOA president immediately." A hush fell over the crowd. Then hands started rising. 1, 2, 5. Then 20. Then 50. A landslide. Karen's eyes darted around the room, her face red with rage. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I built this community. I made the HOA what IT is," Gerald sighed. "And now you've destroyed it." He turned to the board. "The vote stands. Karen Foster is officially removed as HOA president." Karen exploded. "You're all fools," she screamed. "You think you can run this place without me? You think this neighborhood will survive without the HOA controlling it? You're all going to regret this." She grabbed her clipboard and slammed it onto the table. "You don't get to do this." "I have rights. This is my community," one of the board members, a tired-looking man named Rob, sighed. "Karen, you've lost. Just leave." Karen whipped around to face me. "This is your fault," she spat. "You think you won. You have no idea what's coming." I tilted my head. "Karen, I already know what's coming." Her eyes narrowed. I held up one last document. "Because after reviewing the HOA's financial records," I said, "we found something interesting." Karen froze. I set the document on the table. "This," I said, "is a formal complaint filed to the state attorney general. Because Karen didn't just misuse HOA funds on my lake. She's been siphoning money from HOA fees for years." Gasps echoed through the room. "Lies," Karen snapped. "You have no proof of that," I smiled. "Oh, but we do." Gerald stood up again, holding a folder full of bank statements. "These records show that HOA funds have been transferred to personal accounts under Karen's name. She's been using HOA money to pay her mortgage, buy luxury vacations, and even lease a new car." Karen's face went pale. One of the homeowners, a woman named Lisa, stood up. Wait, you mean our dues paid for her house? I nodded. Yep. The crowd erupted, people yelled, cursed, demanded refunds. A man in the back shouted, "You're going to jail for this." Karen was shaking now, her eyes darting toward the exit. I grinned. Go ahead, Karen, run, it won't matter. She turned and bolted for the door. But the second she stepped outside, red and blue lights flashed. 3 squad cars were parked right outside. Karen stumbled back, gasping. The officers stepped forward. Karen Foster. She turned slowly, her face a mask of pure panic. You are under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and illegal seizure of private property. Karen screamed. No, I'm the victim here. He set me up. The officers ignored her, pulling out handcuffs. As they cuffed her, she whipped her head around to glare at me. I'll get you for this. You think this is over? I'll destroy you, I smirked. Karen, I don't think you're in a position to threaten anyone. The officers stuffed her into the back of the car, and just like that, Karen was gone. With Karen finally out of the picture, the neighborhood celebrated. The HOA board voted to dissolve itself, returning full control of the lake to me. And best of all, I got to install a brand new sign at the lake. Private property, no HOA access. For the first time in years, I stood at the dock, looking out over the water and smiled. Finally, peace. Karen was gone, but her damage remained. The HOA had collapsed overnight. With Karen removed and the fraud exposed, the entire structure crumbled. Homeowners rushed to withdraw their memberships and board members resigned in shame. For years, Karen had bullied this community, convinced she was untouchable. Now she was rotting in a holding cell, awaiting trial. And the best part, she still didn't know what was coming next. 3 days after Karen's arrest, I received a call from my lawyer. Eric, he said, we have an update. The state attorney's office is formally charging Karen with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and property theft. The total estimated damages. I leaned forward. How much? He let out a low whistle. Over $300,000. I chuckled. That's a lot of stolen HOA dues. My lawyer continued, and here's the kicker. Since she illegally classified your lake as public property, you're eligible for damages. I raised an eyebrow. How much? $75,000, he said. For unlawful trespass, property devaluation, and emotional distress. I nearly dropped my phone. I had fought this war to protect my home, not expecting to profit from it. But now, Karen was about to lose everything. 1 week later, I got a summons to court. Karen had lawyered up, somehow scraping together enough money to fight the charges. At the hearing, she sat at the defendant's table, looking like a shell of her former self. Gone was the arrogance, replaced with desperation. She was pale, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder of documents. The judge took his seat and read the charges. Karen Foster, you are charged with fraud, embezzlement, trespassing, and falsification of public records. How do you plead? Karen stood, clearing her throat. Not guilty, Your Honor, she said, her voice wavering. The judge nodded, flipping through stacks of evidence. Interesting, he said, because we have bank records showing stolen HOA funds, sworn testimonies from over 20 homeowners, and video evidence of you ordering private property signs removed. Karen's face drained of color. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge sighed. Miss Foster, I suggest you consider a plea deal, because based on the evidence presented, this case is open and shut. Karen panicked. She stood abruptly, slamming her hands on the table. This is a setup, she shrieked. He did this to me. She pointed directly at me. I smirked. The judge was unimpressed. Enough, he snapped. Miss Foster, you have one last chance. Do you accept the plea deal? Karen's hands shook. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Finally, she sighed in defeat. Fine, she muttered. I'll take the deal. The courtroom exploded into murmurs. Karen had officially admitted guilt. The judge nodded. You are hereby sentenced to 3 years in prison, full restitution to the homeowners, and a lifetime ban from holding any HOA leadership positions. Boom, it was over. Karen collapsed into her chair, defeated. For the first time, she realized she had messed with the wrong person. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally started healing. The remaining board members voted to dissolve the HOA permanently. And just like that, the toxic grip on the community was broken. Best of all, I got my $75,000 settlement, and I knew exactly how to use it. I refurbished my lake dock, added a new security fence, and installed high-tech surveillance cameras to ensure that no one would ever try this nonsense again. And for the final touch, I put up a brand new sign, private property, No HOA access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. 1 month later, I got one last surprise. A letter from Karen, sent from prison. It was pathetic. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she had been misguided. She even tried to play the victim. I laughed and shredded it. Karen had made my life a nightmare. She didn't deserve my sympathy. I walked outside, beer in hand, standing at the dock overlooking my lake. It was peaceful again. No HOA, no Karen, just me, my land, and my victory, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. Have you ever had an HOA nightmare? Comment below. I might make your story next.